Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Marketing Hops, where we are sharing pints and perspectives with all kinds of different people across the B2B sales and marketing landscape. I'm excited to dive into another great episode today. Today we have Ian Faison on with us, former West Point graduate, captain in the U.S. Army, and creator and co-writer of something you all maybe have run across or heard of. I know it's a show I've listened to, Murder in HR. Welcome, Ian. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks so much for having me.
Excited to dive in with you and kind of get into just storytelling and your perspective and your career journey and all that good stuff. But we always start out with the cheers on the show. What'd you bring to sip on today?
Well, first, oh man, I was gonna do it right when you were doing your opening. I was gonna do the
The
uh
crack.
yeah, the crack right as you were reading it, like the Will Ferrell where he just cracks the beer and it's like a meme. Anyways, I was gonna do that. It didn't work at all. Yeah, so I'm drinking this is called Forever West, which is a beer by the good people at Cali Craft. Which is right by my house. It's a local brewery here in Walnut Creek, California. It's a West Coast IPA brewed with Amarillo, Centennial, Citra, and Nectaron hops. But it's my son's favorite brewery, and he's 2.5, so got to choose that one.
Oh, nice. Has he sampled any or just likes the hangout spot?
He likes the hangout spot.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
getting some
kind of
ASMR pouring going on here.
Well, I brought today, not super local, but in the state of Washington, from Ice Cold Brewing. They're out in our little Bavarian town called Leavenworth, and it always feels like you're in Bavaria, great Oktoberfest and Christmas lights and all that stuff. But it's their Pilsner, which is first time I had it, I had finished a huge hike when I was training for Mount Rainier, and got to the brewery, and this was the beer I had because it was light, and I still had to drive home. You didn't want anything high ABV, and this thing just hit the mark. So it's become a favorite through that motion there. But if you ever are in Leavenworth, make sure you check these guys out. They're super good.
Nice. That's
But
great. Love it.
we'll dive in. But cheers! Thanks for being on and everything today. Excited to have you on.
I forgot about the actual cheers part. I just went for the drinking part, which is honestly pretty par for the course for me.
Hey, you're excited
forget it.
about what you got to sip on there. So, though I had an Englishman once tell me if you don't have eye contact, cheers roll. But I'm not. It's probably appropriate for our audience. But his comment was, if you cheers and you don't make eye contact, you are going to have 7 years of bad time in the bedroom. So that was his quote, and I have always remembered that, and I've always made eye contact since.
I'll add an amendment that if you don't stare into the camera when you cheers, then you'll have 7 years of bad podcasting, I suppose.
That's not a good sign. That's so hard to do with that's a whole other thing we could get into, is just like your cameras are up here. I got one of the special ones that drops down, but then you got to make sure the other person's camera is like behind it, so I'm looking at you through the camera. All the fun, tricky parts there. Well, I want to dive in and get started because you have a really interesting journey from the military to now running your own company as you go through that. A super popular show under your belt. I'd love to hear from you kind of as you progressed, as you kind of got out of the Army and started on that career journey, kind of some of the biggest learnings shifting to civilian world, but then also as you became an executive, what were some of those big shifts, the hardest challenges that you learned across those? Because I think those are two definitely pivotal transitions in a career and in a life there, but kind of would love to unpack those a little bit. Maybe start with the Army.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the hardest part of going from the military to civilian life was, figuring out a P&L, right? It's like that part is already done for you in the Army, so you don't have to do that. But other than that, so I sort of equate that to business fundamentals, which I had zero fundamentals. So that part is really hard just because it's a lot to learn, and people who have been in business their whole lives are bad at business fundamentals, and entrepreneurship especially. You have to learn every single part of the business, which is really difficult. So that part's really hard. But a bigger thing than that, that I've been thinking about more recently that has been really challenging is this idea of going from a team and a team environment and a team first approach to discovering yourself. And like, as an entrepreneur, as an executive, you have your own personal brand. You have your own personal career. It impacts your family. It impacts your friends. It impacts your happiness. You get to choose all of those things. In the Army, I rarely made any decisions. Most of those were made for me. I made a few, but mostly those decisions are made for you. And really everything is to support the mission and is to support the team. But when you go out on your own, your mission is to support your family or yourself. Yeah. And that part is really hard. And it's really hard to develop a sense of voice and a sense of individualism when everything that I was trained in the Army is sort of the opposite of that. Is, your individualism is not nearly as important. And it's something I just struggled a lot with. And that goes from everything from I write a lot, to, podcasting, which is the business that I'm in, to speaking at conferences, to just having my ideas, to, I started Caspian Studios by myself. And that was really weird. That was the first time I had done that. So, and that was, many years after getting out of the Army, I finally felt comfortable, but sort of just being comfortable with yourself and that there isn't a team around you and that you have to like make the team around you. That's just not what you have in the Army. Like the team that I had in the Army, it was given to me. I had virtually no say in that. So, it's just a different vibe altogether. And, everything in the Army is mission first, and, startup world, not so much.
I think the mission changes, right? Like your mission is just different than what it was while you were in there. As you went through some of that transition and kind of got to the point of leading teams and being a CEO, you kind of made a name for yourself in the marketing community here. Like, what were some of those biggest challenges that you faced, really shifting to that executive kind of level role versus just kind of ongoing? You made it pretty early starting Caspian, but what were those biggest challenges?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I got out of the Army, and I didn't know anything about any business, right? The two things that you don't do in the Army is sales and marketing, right? So those were the first two things that you needed to do, right? So I didn't know any of that stuff. And so what I did was I was already a sort of voracious podcast listener. And so I found like sales podcasts to teach me how to do sales. I found marketing podcasts to teach me how to do marketing. This is a decade ago. So it's very different than it is now. And, I read a lot of books and I sort of learned those lessons very early on. And what's so interesting about that time is it very much sort of influenced, who I became in terms of what I wanted to build and why I wanted to build it and why I wanted to do those things. And it was really hard the only network I had was West Point, which is a massive network in terms of, influence, but not actually very big. There's less than 50,000 West Point grads that have ever graduated from West Point. So, through the whole history of the institution since 1802. So, that part, and not a ton of marketers, if you'd believe it or not. So I did not have a ton of
surprise with that one.
Right. And I started in sales and I moved into marketing. So, so that part of it, was always challenged. But now, now that I'm a CEO and I'm our de facto CMO of Caspian Studios, and thinking about, previous roles where I was managing marketing to now, and it's just a different sort of level of sophistication for what you need to do. But we also work with all CMOs. I have CMOs on our advisory board. We have my mentors are CMOs. I work with CMOs, all day, every day, and marketing teams. And so really just the most important thing has been just learning and listening and asking questions when I didn't know them. But I just didn't know anything about marketing originally. And, you just have to like really dive in. And part of the thing that I think is the most important, which is why I ended up building Caspian, is that practitioner level insights from the cutting edge is the most important thing. It is by far and away the most important thing. And I felt like I did an incredible job networking and meeting people that were at the cutting edge. And I did not realize it at the time. I did not realize how cutting edge it was at the time. I hear startups that are like, oh, they just raised $100 million. And I was like, I think I talked to that founder when we were like 6 weeks into starting the company. You know, like there's so many instances like that I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And I just was very naive in that way. You always look at, everything as the age that it is and not what it ends up becoming. And
Right.
so, you don't realize when you're young that your friends that are managers, that they become directors, that they become VPs and they become CMOs. There's a great quote where, of a bunch of the sort of OG Salesforce people where it was like, the people who were getting us coffee are all CMOs now.
Yeah.
And so anyways, all that to say, it was just a big sort of learning for me that as time progresses, all of your peers end up aging up as well, which is just kind of fascinating.
I think it goes to everybody knows it, but it just continues to reinforce the whole element of not burning bridges in your career, all those kinds of things, because you never know who and what's going to turn into, the next potential boss or the referral network or that kind of thing that you might need, right? That person you talked to forever ago, they're 6 weeks into it now, has $100 million war chest for their startup, could hire you, right? You never know all those kinds of things. So,
Yeah. And I'll give a shout out to the Advanced Selling podcast. That's what I listened to it. I like to say I graduated from their school because I listened to their podcast back in 2014. Also, shout out to the Script Notes podcast, which taught me screenwriting back in 2011. But what's interesting, so the Advanced Selling podcast, they had this this thing, I'll never forget it, and it's called the pregame, and it was an 11-minute downloadable episode that you were supposed to play before every big sales meeting, and it's brilliant. It's so smart. And this is a long time ago at this point, right? Doesn't feel like it, but it was. And it was I think it was 4 tips that you have to like basically tell yourself before you go into every big sales meeting. And one of them was basically like, you don't need this deal. That like, it's okay. The market is massive and like, you don't need it. And I think that if I had been very transactional in my career early on, especially when you're in startup land, where like if you don't close the deal, your company literally might go under, right? Like my previous company, like there were times where it's like, dude, if this deal doesn't close, like I don't know if we're making payroll. And I've since remedied those type of mistakes, but it's really hard to be, not invested in the outcome of that deal closing. But at the end of the day, if you just say, I'm trying to make a relationship the last 20 years, then you just think of things in a bigger time horizon, and you think of things where people would want to keep coming back and working with you because you're going to do what's in their best interest, not in yours. And that was always my thing. It's like, hey, we're just going to do what's in your best interest.
I think that's a really good tip on that. It's definitely it also just gives you a lot more confidence when you're just like, I'm just going to be me, and either it'll work or it doesn't, and we're going to roll through that, and either this is a fit or it's not. And people remember that authenticity and that kind of approach. So you said you've talked to a lot of different CMOs across your career, especially given the work that you're doing now. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're either seeing and experiencing for yourself, that you're hearing from others, that marketers need to be aware of? I'll give you one, for example. I'll call myself a little bit of a podcast pessimist at times because I know I have so many on this. Granted, I'm creating essentially one with this show, but like I have so many that I want to listen to, and I just don't have time for it. Right? There's a few that I make sure I consume on a fairly regular basis. Things like repeating, quick news digest or things like that that help me some. But love your perspective on that. But then would love to hear some of the challenges that you're hearing that are out there, because I know podcasts are continuing to grow up in popularity, and there must be enough of a need and a market for them and that kind of stuff. So maybe we starting there, we can go into challenges.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of opportunities, and this is a bit of a challenge too, but uh, the thing that I do the most that is a mistake, and that I think most CMOs do that is a mistake, is that they are doing too much stuff. It's like, the great Chandar, former CMO of Coupa, he's an advisor to Caspian. He's like, you do three things, that's it. And I think that that's like just such great advice. And all the time I break it. I say, well, let's do this other thing. And then it doesn't end up working and it's, whatever. And you're like, no, I got to do three things. So I think that we all do too much stuff. And I think that our strategies are too broad, and our tactics are far too broad. And then when you do that, you're just doing way too much stuff and you're not doing anything really well. So that is, I think, the first thing. For us at Caspian, my marketing strategy, I call it the three Ps: podcasts, partners, and paid. And the reason why is because, and podcast is really, it's just so I could fit three Ps in there, to be fully honest, but it actually is really an owned media strategy, where you co-create content, original content, with your customers or prospects, in addition to your own original stuff. So really you could call it owned media, partners, and paid. And I start with that because it's the most important. The second most important is partners, and the third most important is paid. And I think that for us, what I've seen is nothing can beat our original content. Nothing ever beats it, because nobody comes up to me and says things that don't have to do with the creative that we've put out in the world. Nobody does that. Nobody comes out and is like, you have the most unique offering. Like, nobody says that. Well, they'll be like, dude, I saw your ad and it's really funny. Or your newsletter is really good. Or I listened to the episode that you did with Jeff and it was amazing. That's what they say. Or they say, how the heck did you work with Kate Mara? So all of these questions, these are all substance questions. They're all things that have to do with really remarkable creative, AKA you have to talk about it with someone else. That's what remarkable means. It means you have to go talk about it. That's why my podcast is called Remarkable, is because you have to go talk about stuff. Otherwise, we're not doing our job as marketers. Sure, you could go, sign up for something by yourself, but most of us are in enterprise sales in some form or fashion. There's a buying committee of sorts, so it's not just good enough to do it yourself. And so when I looked at all that stuff, that the most important thing for me was making content that I loved, that I felt like marketers would also love. And it starts there. And honestly, if you go look at any artwork that has ever been created, it's not created in a freaking lab. It's created because someone has a vision for something and it's unique and interesting and compelling, and they bring it to the world and people love it. It never starts the opposite way. And so I think that part of it is you just have to create stuff that you think deserves to be in market, that your customers would love, that your prospects would love. And if you start there, then you can work and say, okay, well, which partners would we want to co-create stuff with? Because they also are selling to the same group of people. They also would want to bring that message. And then you go from there down to paid and you say, okay, how do we take this message and spread it even further? How do we do what organic can't do? And that's what paid does, is it takes that message and all the cool creative stuff you did and gets it into all the reaches of the internet so that people can find you those places, or if they're searching for your product and service. And so that's sort of how I think about it. And I think it starts with the best creative wins. It just does. The best creative wins. People love shows. They love content. They love the best stuff. They love The Office. And so, again, those are the things that are memorable that they talk about. They don't talk about all the boring stuff.
That's a really interesting point on that, because we can all talk about something that caught our eye, that drew us in, that so I fall into this bucket a lot, where probably produce content that isn't the greatest, right? As you go through that, and we did it for reasons, but at the end of the day, we are, as marketers, are asking people to give up literally the most valuable resource in the world, which is time, to consume our stuff. And so we kind of owe them value in exchange for that. Like, what are they going to take away? Uh, I'm trying to think. Like, I know some recent pieces that have come out that I found value and I've remarked on. Like Carrie Cunningham did a great buyer's journey research that I was able to consume and actually action. And it was, research driven. It wasn't necessarily entertaining, but it was something that helped me do better. But honestly, I was struggling to think of some of the latest entertaining stuff that I've come across. What have you seen recently that's been like really good content that's jumped out at you?
Oh, that's a great question. Do you mean business or just any type?
Either, honestly.
Yeah, it's a great question. I uh I think Shogun is popping out right now. I think that people love epics. They love period pieces. People are talking about that a lot. I haven't started watching it yet. I'm super excited to dig in. So that's pretty cool. And then the other one, which I just started watching, is Fallout. And, we never take our cues, God forbid, from the video game industry here in B2B. But the Fallout TV show is amazingly good right now, super compelling, unbelievably weird in every way. And I've seen a lot of people, myself included, remark to other people about it and go, like, I texted my friend, I went, when did we play Fallout again? Like, I forget when was that, right? I saw someone that was like, hey, Fallout is so good, I'm going back and I'm playing it again. Wow, like that's the nirvana for a marketer, right? Is we created a video game that's amazing to play. Then we created a piece of content that adds to the video game so much so that you want to go play it again.
Yeah.
Right? This is like the Lego movie, right? The Lego movie was so good, it increased Lego sales by 25%, right?
Yeah.
So it's like those are the sort of things that I'm obsessed with is how do you build the world deeper? How do you create other opportunities to engage? And brands just like so rarely do that, and so rarely are effective with it. The Last of Us, I don't know if you watched that show, also based off a video game. It was incredibly done. The guy Craig Mazin who wrote it was the guy I was mentioning, Script Notes. That's his podcast. It's from years ago. He's really funny because he's very curmudgeon-y. And then he did The Last of Us, which is an adaptation of this video game. But anyways, so yeah, no, I just think that stuff stands out, and like that's the stuff we should take cues from. And it's like, people are like, well, it can't be done in B2B. And it's like, no, it can. Like, 20 years ago, Mark Benioff was like, I'm going to throw the biggest party in San Francisco every year and just say it's a tech conference. Like,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we can do that. If you look at how much money we spend. I was talking to someone with CMO of a big company, publicly traded company, and they're saying that they're spending $4 million on their billboard ad. And I was like, you could create an actual like universe of stuff for $4 million.
With that much money versus the people who happen to drive by.
Yeah. And I'm like, not to say that billboards are bad. They're not. But I'm saying there's something that you could do that's better, that's more impactful, that gets a percentage of people to share it with their friend and go, wow, this is amazing. And I would say if that billboard doesn't have people taking photos of it with their phone and sharing with their friends, then it's 100% a failure. But like, you should be able to create something like with Murder in HR. When we created this series, we had people in HR and like groups of HR professionals reaching out to us like, hey, can we just be involved? Like, this is so cool. And like, we had someone wanted a private screening of Murder in HR for their team. That was a prospect of Gympass, of our partner, right? They're like, hey, we just want to get a private screening of this. Like, when do you do that when you see marketing? Never. Well,
Never.
Yeah, maybe we should make better stuff.
Maybe this is controversial. Not probably you and this one, but that billboard probably had a lot to do to some extent with ego. right?
100%.
Somebody wanted to see their brand, their thing up on the highway as they drive to and from work. And if you drive through the Bay, you see them everywhere. But how do you, why, I mean, why are CMOs afraid to make those kinds of big bets, those kinds of content? Because if you can go burn 4 million on a billboard, to your point, you could do so much more, but there's hesitancy. Is it a lack of wanting to do that stuff? Is it a fear? Like, what have you found? Or I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's a fear. What one of the things that we have like tested some copy basically around this idea of Hollywood storytelling with Caspian, because we work with Hollywood, we work with Hollywood actors, we work with Hollywood agents, we work with Hollywood writers, and some of the stuff that we're doing is Hollywood work, right? Like one of the things we got a Webby honoree for is for best scripted podcast. It's not best B2B podcast. It's literally best scripted out of every single scripted podcast that either Hollywood or whoever wanted to make. And which, like we don't do it for the awards, but it's great to get the recognition, right? I was like, oh, that's cool. Good. But we wanted to position more around Hollywood. And because I think that it's differentiated, right? Like that's, no one can do that. We do that, right? And I was thinking about it and I'm like, no, it's so important. It's like core to who we are. Like everything that we touch has a little bit of Hollywood in it. And I started talking to other sort of marketing leaders, and they're basically like, I get what you're saying, but if I take that to my CFO, they're going to be like, podcast what? Hollywood
Right.
what? That sounds like brand. I'm not spending $1 on that, right? So I think that there's just a lot of fear of taking something that doesn't tie directly to revenue. But the thing that does tie directly to revenue is just spending tons of money on paid ads. And like that doesn't scale at all. Like you just spend more
expensive.
Yeah, you just spend more and more money. So, it's like, I don't really get how that makes sense either. So I think that there's a lot of fear there. I have no idea what the answer is to that. We try to do our best to say like, hey, this is what it could do, and this is how we could track the digital journey a little bit, and this is, there's certain things there that we could do. And it's getting better and better, which is great for podcast and video stuff. But so first and foremost, I think people are afraid. But there's a subset of the population that is incredibly creative that are not getting their ideas made. There's another subset of the population that is not actually that creative and they don't have any ideas. And I told you this, that one of my friends, that they get asked every time they interview for a big CMO job, that someone asks them, what's your big crazy idea that you've never been able to do, right? And there's people who do really well with that answer, and there's people who don't do really well with that answer. And there's people who are extremely, data savvy, and there's people that are more on the idea savvy, maybe, or the creative savvy. But I think it's hard for people, for a CFO or a CEO, if they're very analytical, to say that creative can be 10 times, 100 times more valuable. And they don't necessarily believe that. So you're trying to convince someone that doesn't necessarily believe it, and you go, okay, well, do you think that Jurassic Park is 100 times better than, I don't know, whatever movie that you forgot about? Is it 1,000 times better?
Right.
Is it 100,000? I mean, like Jurassic Park is, you could watch it tomorrow with your kids, and it's going to scare the living heck out of them when the dinosaur, when the T-Rex
opens up and screams.
Right. And so like, you're like, well, creative actually is a huge differentiator. It is one of the most important things that we have. And yet you don't want to invest in that. You want to invest in, just the other stuff. So I think there's just certain people that are just not true believers that creative is a differentiator. But we all revere Steve Jobs, and we all, sort of, many of these people also pray at the mantle of Steve Jobs. And I say that sounds mean, but I mean it in a positive way of like Steve is, Steve Jobs is amazing with what
Yeah.
he did from product, and he's probably one of the best marketers of all time. But he also was the most idealistic marketer there could possibly be. Like he was trying to spread ideas. He was using incredible creative. They did tons and tons and tons of influencer marketing. If you look at how
Yeah.
much Apple did there. So it was always aspirational. It was always brand. It was always creative. It was always all that stuff. And yet, we sit here sometimes and we let the CFO talk us down on that brand maybe isn't that important, that creative isn't that important. I mean, that's kind of bullshit.
I think the hard part on it is just it's that fear of losing your job, right? If you make a bet and it doesn't play out, like I think of one experience I had at Microsoft. Even as I built this. It was early days of Jason Miller, Adam Marketo. They came up with this Big Rock content theory, and so I worked on building a magazine. I was trying to create something that would compete with CMO.com.
Right.
And we came up with this whole brand. It was marketing at Microsoft originally, Project Evolution, but then we thought we should get a little closer. It was well structured, incredibly researched content, differing lengths, all kinds of stuff. And we cut it into this digital world, and nothing in it was kept a secret. Everybody knew what was going on. We get to launch day. When we turn it on, and it's been on for like 3 hours, and I get a phone call from somebody high up, one of the VPs there, and they're like, "This has to come down. It's upset certain people in other parts of the business, and this is the kind of stuff people get fired for." And it was just like, God, knife through the heart. Like we had our next three things like outlined, ready to go. We had gotten great market feedback ahead of launch on like, this is the kind of content people want and they're hungry for it. And just like, I'll admit, I was, in one of those groups that just, you hear those things and it's kind of job or push the creative envelope, right? It's it's a real concern, and it kind of kills some of that it scares you to dare to dream big.
But
To
wouldn't
some
you get
extent.
fired anyways? That's my question. Wouldn't you just get fired anyways? Or like, you know, um, if you dated someone and you love cars and you meet him and you're like, this is the perfect person for me. And they're like, the one thing I can't stand is cars. You'd be like, I probably shouldn't marry this person because of the thing that I like, they don't like, I shouldn't do it. So it's like, if you're at the place that doesn't believe that, like, go let someone else do that job. Like,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's easy for me to say, I've never been the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or anything like that, or any company that's materially large in any way. So I have no idea what it's like on that side. I've never been a CFO. I've never done any of that stuff. I've just been on the revenue side trying to make people buy stuff, help them buy stuff, I should say, and make them, see things that are interesting that I see. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe it's easier on our end, but I'm just like, dude, I'm not working for that person.
Yeah. It's definitely a good call out. There's definitely lessons learned going through that motion, and sometimes it's, people will live in that land. Sometimes certain groups, especially in big companies, do the more creative things, and maybe you need to switch teams, or maybe that's not the right role for you. Kind of as you go through it, obviously not there anymore. So, but it's still one of probably my most proudest pieces of content that I ever produced. Like, and the strategy behind it and everything that was with it. That's the part that I think is really interesting. Like, as we look into that, is, eh, you know, what why aren't CMOs today truly taking those chances, taking that risk? Like, we hear, hey, you need to build an owned audience because first party cookie or third party cookies are going
Sure.
away. So you need to start to own this. The buying journey is changing, so you need to be able to capture and draw it in. There's this, lean into authenticity. Yet most of the CMOs I talk to are still in the old playbooks because I can at least have metrics with the old playbooks versus being
Yeah.
like, hey, here's a strategy that's going to take 18 months. And guess what? That's the average tenure of a CMO still, if not shorter. And I don't have time to let these things play. Like we're missing that spark to take a chance.
Yeah. I mean, wise men once said that the DJ controls the crowd. And I kind of think about the CMO as sort of a bit of a DJ here, right? Where you have 3 records spinning at the same time. In this analogy, the record, for those uninitiated, is an actual record. It's not digital. And there are 3 different songs that are going. One of them is owned media, one of them is partners, and one of them is paid. And what I did for myself, because it's my company and if it goes under, it's my fault. So true ownership is, I said, we're going to let the record play on the paid at the beginning. We're going to start to like layer in a little bit of the partner, and we're going to go into some build phase on the owned. And over time, I've sort of been tuning out the beats from the paid part and using those more as retargeting, less as cold, using the owned as a much more cold play there. And then keeping that partner piece running so that it's getting in front of the communities that I care about. And like, I think it's an idea of changing from people who are buying to influencing communities. You know, we hear about the like 95% of people aren't ready yet to buy. Man, that is true. I don't know who thinks that isn't true. Maybe
you can just convince them to 50 cold emails, right?
Yeah, no, just like if I keep emailing them and you're like, that's crazy. Dude, but have they been there? Have they been there on the 5th email in a row that you haven't got a response and you're staring over it and you're like, God, am I really going to send this? They haven't responded to 4 in a row check-ins, you know, and it's brutal. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But I've been there. I'm there every day, and people are busy, and, you know, you need other ways to shape them. You need to be in a partner webinar. I had someone who's like, I get Ian's emails every week. You know, this is great. I'm glad you do. And how did they get in there? And we looked it up, and they went on it was a partner webinar, you know? And so I think that it's so important to be able to spin the first 2, and the paid is the thing that backs it up, not the one that drives it. It's not driving cold engagement. I want them to meet us somewhere else, somewhere where they're smart, right? Somewhere where, you know, maybe somebody else says, hey, you should listen to what Caspian Studios has to say. That's a lot more impactful. And I think that, you know, people who don't go that route, you know, everything is cold, everything is interruptions. You know, Seth Godin talks about this a lot. It's interruption marketing, right?
Yeah.
Who the hell wants that? Nobody, not me, surely. I don't want to be interrupted. I want to get warm intros from my friends that are like, dude, this is the best thing. And to your point earlier about content, well, there's so much content. There's an overload of content. There always has been an overload of content. We just, you know, there was better curation back then. People were making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books every day, but, you know, you didn't necessarily know it because you didn't have access to all of it on the internet 24/7.
Right.
You were just getting better curation. But if I message you out of the blue and I was like, Jeff, this is the best 45-minute podcast episode I've ever listened to. I promise if you listen to this, you'll like change your life. You'd be like, all right, rock on, Ian.
Gonna listen to it.
Yeah, I'm gonna listen to it. I'll give it a shot. But dude, how much time do we spend making stuff that isn't that way?
No. I mean, it begs the question, right? And I love asking this whenever I get in front of a room. Again, I'm guilty of this stuff. So
I mean, me too. We're all guilty of it. You know, like
it's like, how many of you have made a white paper and ebook in the last 30 days, and all the hands go up. You're like, how many of you have read one that's not your own? And it's like 3 in a
So
room.
true.
And it's because we make all these things, and I think about how many things I've downloaded and I've never consumed, right? Podcast content, all these things. But there are those that just stand out. Like one I was recently listening to is, and I got exposed to it at Outreach's conference. They had Mel Robbins speak on the 5-second rule. I've now downloaded her ebook or Audible, whatever it is on here.
One of the great ones.
And I've recommended it to a bunch of people, right? And it's like, how do you go through? And I guess the video on the jump in line is like Gong took a bunch of their research and analyzed it, and it was a tactical how to send slightly better cold emails. Maybe that's not a good example of that one because cold emailing.
No, I mean,
cold
there, examples.
But the nugget seems helpful.
We send a lot of cold emails. The cold email is fine. It's a message that's wrong.
Yeah,
it's fine to send someone a cold email. It's if you send someone a cold email with an expectation that you're going to do something for them that they find interesting. You put out into the universe and you said, "Hey, I'm doing this podcast," and I was like, "Dude, that sounds great. I would love to talk." That's fine. When the cold email is, "Hey, Jeff, give me 50 grand," that would not be a great email to get. This is the opposite of good.
Like, so I get 50 grand for doing that? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you're like, "Hey, Ian, I could get you a week off," I'm like, okay, tell me how I get my week off. That sounds great. So I think that the problem is as always, the message is watered down or weird. And it's sent from someone who's unqualified to give the message. That's the other thing. I mean, dude, if it's an enterprise deal, man, I don't want to hear from someone who is not fit to be at my station. It's just the way of the world. When have you ever got advice ever in your life from anyone who's unfit to give it to you? You would never do that.
But in business, TikTok could give it, but
whether we listen to, it's a different story.
That's a great point. I know, that's right. I take all my parenting tips from people who I have no idea who they are. But that's what a sales rep is. It's there's great ones, there's bad ones, there's whatever. But sometimes, there's people who are wildly, unprepared for that sort of thing. So, anyways, we give those people a lot of responsibility, and then we let them email people 5,000 times a day, and that's bad.
So I know we're coming up on our time here. I want to ask you a couple key kind of quick questions. One, and this may not be a quick answer. What's your drunk idea, or the idea you haven't been able to do yet? It's big, hairy, and audacious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to make this because I built a company that does this sort of thing. But I am going to make a podcast called Murder and Marketing. But that has always been my drunk idea. That I think that a murder mystery set in a B2B SaaS company is like the funniest thing ever. And I have a pitch for it, and I have ideas for it, and I've been writing it for years. And so that's my idea that has not been greenlit yet. And I can't greenlight it myself because I don't have the money. The cobbler whose kids have no shoes. But that is going to happen someday. And I think that marketing deserves it, and they deserve to have something fun and funny and entertaining that is marketing content that you could watch, or your sister could watch, or your mom could watch, or your cousin could watch, and other than Mad Men, which is Mad Men is great, but it's not B2B marketing.
No, not. Office is probably the closest along those lines, but that still doesn't hit the mark. And Death by 1,000 MQLs, I'm sure, has to fit in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, kind of quick rapid fire on this one. Everybody's got their favorite couple technology, sales and marketing. What are your top 3 that you've got to have? What are you hot on right now?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So the ones that we really rely on a lot because we have tons of for podcast stuff. So we have like Script and Riverside and all the tools that you use for podcast stuff. From an entrepreneurship perspective, JustWorks is like the best thing ever. They're a PEO. They do HR, payroll, all that stuff. They negotiate benefits. JustWorks is the best tool for me, hands down. Not marketing, but super helpful. So from a marketing perspective, number one is Canva. Canva is the best. Canva is so great for our designers that do like the really complex Adobe Illustrator, all that stuff. It's great. You can make more complex stuff, but just so many things in marketing just need to happen at a moment's notice. So Canva, so love Canva. We use a combination of Lemlist and one other tool that I can't remember. Well, so basically our marketing automation tools, we use ActiveCampaign, Lemlist, and one other tool that I can't remember. And basically I want to send emails that get delivered. This is my message there. Send an email that gets delivered. So that's super important. Of course, you have to have a CRM. And then the third one that I would say is Calendly, that we use. Calendar scheduling. It's like, so easy. Got to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good list, and some new ones in there that got called out on that. Last question, which is, if you could give a piece of career advice to a young marketer early in their career, I think I have a feeling where it might go, but I'm going to ask anyway. But what would that be?
Geez. Yeah, there's so many different, ideas that come to mind because marketing is so tough to do. But me, I go back to this thing called it's called naive networking. It's I think it was a magazine article that a guy named Anthony DeToto taught me. He passed away a number of years ago. He's a great dude, great networker. And he taught me about naive networking. And it essentially boils down to, don't ask for a meeting when a call will do. Don't ask for a call when an email will do. Don't ask for an email when a text will do. And he was a really good networker who was constantly getting at what you needed, helping you figure out what you needed, and then connecting that to someone else who could provide it. And it was very much not about him. And I remember, he was like, hey, someday, it'll come back around, but don't worry about it. And I think that that's the most important thing for any young professional to do is how you network. If you just replace the word networking with helping people by making connections, that is the most valuable thing that you can do. It's just like you have something in between your ears that is capable of writing and creating and doing all sorts of amazing stuff for other people. And if you start to sort of, make dots all over the place, I think Steve Jobs said this, eventually you can connect the dots, right? And so I think that it's so important to go into every engagement of you're trying to meet people to connect them to other people. And I forget the exact story, but the story goes like this. There was a person who had just moved into town, and his tooth was killing him, and he went and found a dentist. It was a crown. You needed a crown. Gets the crown put in, and he spends the next 6 months, and he can't meet anyone. When it comes to business, he's just not doing very well, and he runs into somebody, and he's trying to raise money for a startup. He's like, hey, will you give me money? And the guy's like, dude, I don't know. I can't even think about money. He's like, well, what can you think about? He's like, I got this toothache. He's like, do you have a dentist? He's like, I have just the guy. right? And so it's like, it speaks to that exact moment of, in that moment, the thing that is most important is the one connection that he actually did make, and that he could provide that. And that person happened to be an investor and invested in a startup. And so like, that is the message, right? It's like, even if it's your dentist, even if it's whatever, that you're supposed to make the connections for other people. And if you think of other people, you are so much further along than anybody else. So few people actually think of other people. And so if you're just like, hey, I can connect you to this person, and if it never happens, it never happens. But that, anyways, long story short, that's my piece of advice.
I love it. I love that. That was great. Where can people find you? And if they want to get in touch, or kind of, do you have an email newsletter, any fun stuff along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, just go to caspianstudios.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Ian Faison. You can always ask me anything at or Ian at caspianstudios.com for my email. No, I'm an open book. I mean, whatever people want to know about building a podcast, building a show, building any type of content, we've been there, done that. We've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of podcast episode, video series, social videos, all that stuff. So if people have questions about content and where that fits into their marketing strategy, happy to help, or just anything else.
I think that's a great way to wrap it. I mean, to figuring out the messages that are going to land, right? Daring to dream big, making content that maybe might get you fired if that's the right spot, because it actually is. It's memorable and meaningful. That's the stuff that definitely stands out, and I love that piece on the naive networking, because it is about what you can give. And all great advice, all good nuggets to take away from here. Thanks for being on the show again, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Cheers.
Cheers. Sweet.